Hey, what's going on? And welcome to episode 14 of the horridly infrequent Neoncast. As many of you may know, and maybe some of you don't know, I had all kinds of plans for this channel, and I was gearing up to do far more frequent things and release more content, and then life came in and changed those plans. All good stuff, I guess, though, so no worries. But it still affected all of my plans for this, so, I haven't had as much time to do this, and even Twitch, which I have been doing, I've been doing less often. But yeah, so I'm back for another episode of the Neoncast, in which I'm not really sure what I'm going to talk about yet. So here's the deal. I'm going to see Spider-Man Homecoming today, later today. I'm recording this on Saturday morning. But that's to just do it about that. I don't know if I'm going to have an hour's worth of material to discuss. I mean, I'm seeing good reviews, including for people I didn't really expect to see good reviews from, so that's good. But I don't know. I mean, I might just love it, and that's it. Who knows? So I figured I would record something now and then maybe combine it with that so that I have something a little more robust to release. And the easiest thing for me to discuss right now on this A segment, if you want to call it, is a movie I saw last weekend, Baby Driver, the Edgar Wright movie. Yeah, so we could just dive right into that, I guess. And if I get distracted and go on tangents and stuff, then so be it. So yeah, Baby Driver, Edgar Wright's latest movie. The story about Edgar Wright, British writer, director, Simon Pegg, Nick Frost, Spaced, Shaun of the Dead, Hot Fuzz, etc. Scott Pilgrim. Look into this guy. If you don't know who Edgar Wright is at all, I really recommend you go check him out. Not everybody loves him. I love him. Not everybody loves him. Not everybody loves Scott Pilgrim. Not everybody loves like Hot Fuzz or The World's End. I think most people like Shaun of the Dead. I don't think I know anybody who doesn't like that movie. I mean, I'm sure people like it to varying extents, but I can't remember if I've ever spoken to somebody who said I don't like Shaun of the Dead. And for me personally, Shaun of the Dead is exactly the kind of comedy I like. I'm more a fan of comedies that are contextually comedic rather than a comedy. It's a movie with Will Ferrell and Amy Poehler about a crazy... I almost never find movies like that funny. I mean, I'm sure there's jokes in it. Like if you force me to sit down and watch, I don't know, The House or Rough Night or any of the other million comedies that come out in a year that I pay no attention to, I'm sure I'll laugh. Again, to varying degrees, because some movies are funnier than others. But that's not the kind of thing that I want to see in a comedy. The comedies I like are exactly movies like Shaun of the Dead or Deadpool or stuff like that. Stuff that's funny but is actually a good movie of almost of another kind and has jokes in it. I think that was a big difference between the original Ghostbusters and the remake that they made, if we can put aside social politics for a second. I feel like the original Ghostbusters is a contextually funny movie. It's not a comedy. There's no wacky jokes in it. It's a movie about, it's a sort of a fantasy adventure movie, right? About ghost hunting or whatever, supernatural. And it's funny because it has funny people in it and it's well written and there's a funny moments. There's no like, I'm slipping and I'm falling, I'm hitting my head into the bucket's falling on my head. And I don't know, it's not a comedy. It wasn't, it's not, I don't know. I'm making the same point over and over, right? Basically, make a movie that's a good movie of some sort and then put jokes in it. You know, you look at a movie like The House, which is just off the top of my head because that's something that's in the theaters now. that's a comedy. Meaning that's the only way to define it. If you look at Zombieland, it's a zombie movie that's funny. Shaun of the Dead, a zombie movie that's funny. Cabin in the Woods, a horror movie that's funny. It's funny because it's self-aware and it has clever plays and twists on tropes. And so if you're a fan of that genre, you would recognize those tropes. You would appreciate the inside references. And in that kind of playground, it's easy to elicit laughs because you have the same frame of reference. You both know, the history of horror movies in America, and the history of horror movies in Asia. And so if you see, I don't know, a reference to The Ring, it's easier to make something funny of because you don't really need to explain that much. Simple visuals give you the cues that you need, or simple references. That's how something like The Big Bang Theory functions, just to a way sort of wider and lower extent. Sorry if you like that show, but it's true. They go for really easy references. This is like Captain Kirk, and this is like Doctor Who. But that effectively has the same result. It's in order to bring up something that we all know, and then that thing is easy to use as a crutch for a joke. And which brings us back to Edgar Wright. Edgar Wright is really good at doing just that. I think all of Edgar Wright's movies, all 4 of them, function in that way. They are good movies that... 5 movies, sorry. Because Baby Driver is the 5th. They're all good movies of certain genres that also have funny things in them. And I think that in Edgar Wright's case specifically, this is something that he does consciously. Shaun of the Dead was like, hey, let's take a zombie movie and mix it with kind of like a weird Bridget Jones, quirky British comedy about a guy who needs to get his life together to win his girlfriend back. And Hot Fuzz is a little like a crazy 90s action extravaganza mixed with like a sleepy British murder mystery. And the World's End is also it's like a Big Chill style drama about sort of a drama hidden behind like a comedic conflict between old friends, one of whom has some kind of baggage that the others are trying to deal with, mixed with Invasion of the Body Snatchers, and which brings us to Baby Driver, a movie that's basically like a heist, a sort of a heist robbery movie mixed with like a musical, I guess, sort of. I mean, it doesn't have musical numbers in it like in the way that you think like a musical like Beauty and the Beast would, where the characters start singing. But it has musical numbers, certainly. It has a lot of sequences that are built around music, and it does have scenes with the main character, sort of dancing around and singing. He's not singing. He's singing along to whatever he's listening to on his iPod. And that combination seems really strange. And also the premise of this movie seemed really kind of boring to me when I first heard of it. I was like, really? How many times have we seen a movie about, bank robbers and about a really good getaway driver and, wacky robber characters that are over the top? Who cares? That's sort of what I thought initially, until I found out who was making it. And that's where this movie shines. This movie shines on style. And I think I said this on Twitter. I don't like when people say style over substance. Because that's a criticism that only applies in a certain situation, I think. I think that it applies if a movie pretends that it's substantive, but it only does stylistic things. Like if you pretend that your movie is really heady and deals with like really complicated topics and really sort of intense moral dilemmas, but in reality, you're just like, it's all just like fake high drama, and it's all about the music hits and the way the camera moves and stuff like that. then you can say, okay, this movie's style over substance. However, sometimes style is the substance. Sometimes what you're doing is you're making a relatively simple story, or alternatively just a story that's been done before, and you inject it with your unique point of view. And if your point of view is unique and good, you can really elevate the material, and he really does that here. I mean, this movie is great, okay? I know I probably should have I should have let off with that instead of leading you down this like 10-minute rabbit hole to get to the point where I say that I really like this movie. But I think it's important to understand why I like it. And I like style. I like stylistic filmmaking. I obviously like substantive filmmaking too. I mean, a movie that can convey a really good idea doesn't have to be artistically hefty. Spotlight is a good example of that. It won a bunch of Oscars. It's a great movie. It has great acting in it. It's shot very boringly. There's no art. There's no artistry really in the filmmaking. It's just a good story told well, because of the cast and the way they convey their emotions and stuff, and it's sort of well written. But it's not like a visual sensation, right? It's not Mad Max. It's not like Lord of the Rings, The Return of the King, which won Best Picture. That's a pretty good example of a movie that like also has that artistic flair. It's not exactly deep though. It's sort of a simple idea. But my point was that sometimes movies win the Oscar that are really high-style drama, and sometimes really regular, in quotes, movies do it. Like Moonlight, I haven't seen that movie yet, but I hear from someone I know that that's the problem with it. He said to me, Moonlight's really great. I just really wish that it was like filmed more interestingly and with better colors, and like that would have really, really took it like an extra step up. Like the acting's great, the writing's great, the story's great. It just doesn't look amazing. Like not even shot pops at you. And yeah, I do like directors where like, sit around and conceive every shot and everything looks really meticulous. Nicholas Winding Refn, who made Drive and other movies, is a good example of that. Of someone who's like, there are no throwaway shots in his movies. Everything is really, really beautiful every time. And Edgar Wright, his style involves interesting filmmaking, interesting editing and pacing, and in this case specifically, in other cases too, but in this case specifically, use of music. Now, use of music, especially kind of older school rock and maybe stuff from the 70s, and it is really, really trendy right now because of Guardians of the Galaxy, which came out in 2014 and really caused somewhat of like a paradigm shift in the way people think about soundtracks for movies, not scores, but soundtracks, and also trailers. I mean, if you think about it, it's one of the most influential movies in that sense since like The Dark Knight, which was more influential, granted, because for the next 10 years after that, everybody tried to turn their movie into The Dark Knight. Bourne and Bond and, even The Mummy, which came out now, is sort of like a Dark Knight Mummy, where everything is kind of gray and desaturated and, that kind of visual style. And Guardians of the Galaxy was hugely influential in the way people think about popular songs, old popular songs, and when and how to use them in movies. The problem with that is that most of the people who do that are just creating these like second-rate copies of what James Gunn does, because he does it so well. And I recommend you go out and you read. There's actually articles out there where he explains his thought process in picking songs and where to put them and how to use them. And in Guardians of the Galaxy 2, I think he took his own game up a notch. I like the first soundtrack better, but I feel like the second soundtrack actually fits in with the story better. And so I feel like he like leveled up in his skill in doing this, because like a song like Brandy, which is like a central song to the plot of that movie, then becomes relevant. The lyrics become relevant to the plot. And I don't think just off the top of my head, there was nothing like that in the first movie. And then also they had the father and son, Cat Stevens thing at the end. It was more closely tied to what was going on. But then you have something like Suicide Squad, which is just a really lame, simplistic, sort of second rate, as I said, attempt to do that kind of same thing. And if you go back and listen to my Neoncast about Suicide Squad, I actually do discuss this, and I discuss how it feels very forced and like it was done at the last minute and stuff. So I'm not gonna repeat all that stuff here. But the point I'm actually getting at is that Edgar Wright in Baby Driver and other movies out of it, specifically in Baby Driver, manages to do something really special and really unique that is totally his own thing and does not at all feel like, here's another Guardians kind of thing, even though the movie is full of old songs. It has some new songs in it too, but like it has old songs, that come on during the various sequences and stuff. But it's different. And I think we're at about the 15 or 16 minute mark right now. So I'm going to be mildly spoilerish. I'm not, you know what? Like, I'm not going to reveal anything about the plot. But even if I did, I don't think it would be that it would really make a difference. I mean, maybe a little, right? Because you don't like going to a movie and knowing exactly what happened. But this is a really unique example of a movie that really survives on the experience. I also told everybody after I saw it that this is exactly the kind of movie that you should leave your house and go see in the theater. It's big and it's loud and it's a big spectacle. And so, if a movie's like a whodunit and you want to pay attention really closely to all the dialogue, and maybe if you want to get up and go to the bathroom, you want to pause the movie. So maybe that movie's not as important to leave your house and go see in the theater. Something like this, it's a really big spectacle. And like I said, it's big and loud and fast and fun. And so, yeah, I'm not going to spoil it or anything. But I'll just give like a really brief outline just so that I can explain stuff a little further. It's Ansel Elgort. He plays this guy, Baby. He's a getaway driver for a mob boss, played by Kevin Spacey. And he's a really, really, really good driver. That's his thing. And he always listens to music. I'm not going to tell you why. That's explained later or whatever. There's no need to. But the point is he always has headphones in, and he's always listening to music. And the music helps him concentrate and focus. Like he really needs it in order to drive well. He needs to have his tunes, the way that those songs are woven into the visuals is really, really clever. And I've never really seen it done quite like that. I've seen hints of it elsewhere, but I don't think it's ever been done as comprehensively and as robustly as this. Meaning it's really one of it's one of those things that this movie's going to be known for, Meaning like, it feels like in 10 or 15 years, people will still reference this movie because of this thing that he does in it with the music. That's really unique. And I mean, that's quite an achievement. I mean, I'm sure I can't step into the head of a filmmaker, but I gotta imagine that having a movie of yours become famous because of a really cool thing that you did in it, and then it becomes like a point of reference for that cool thing forever, has to be sort of a satisfying feeling, I'm sure. And so, yeah, the car chases, the gunfights, a lot of that stuff is all synced in quotes to the music. It's more interesting than that to just say that it's synced to it. It plays off of the music, and the music plays off of reality, and it has this sort of pseudo fantasy style where you're almost not sure if like the thing that you're seeing that's perfectly synced to the music is actually happening that way in the world, or whether or not his imagination kind of shifts things a little so that they kind of fit in with the song he's listening to. It's a little hard to explain. You really have to watch it. And it also has some of the sort of wonderful Edgar Wright long takes that also work with the music and are just, I mean, I really appreciate the effort of filmmaking. I think that filming something that's difficult to film sort of an indication of how much effort you want to put into this thing that you're doing, right? That doesn't mean that people who don't do it aren't putting effort into it, but there are a couple of sequences in this movie and others in other movies that he's made that could have far more easily have been done. I'll back that up. That could have been done in a far more easy way, rather than doing like a 3 or 4 minute long tracking shot where the things that you see have to be synced with the song that's playing, and there's no cuts, and there's, a million moving pieces. You got your Goodfellas shot, you got your Boogie Nights shots, that kind of stuff. You don't have to do it. There's no rule that you need to film an entire sequence without cutting. And a lot of people who watch movies don't even notice it. I have a little switch in my brain where, like, if the camera doesn't cut after, 30 or 40 seconds, especially if it's moving, my brain goes like, I think they're doing a long take. I did this in Baby Driver too. I think I leaned over to someone, my friend who was sitting next to me, and I said, like, they haven't cut in a while. Like, we're watching a long take. I just like that. I mean, that's a personal thing that I like, and I know that a lot of people are sort of indifferent about. But again, it just takes me back to what I said about creative effort. I feel like saying, like, hey, let's spend 3 weeks figuring out how to shoot this one thing because it'll be really amazing if we shoot it that way is, I don't know. Like, I feel like I'm getting something better. Mad Max Fury Road could have been done in far more easy ways. It could have been shot in easier locations. It could have used way more digital effects than it did, but they didn't, and you can see that they didn't. And it just, there is this kind of like intangible that results in actually filming things for real. Because CGI eventually is going to get to the point where, and it already is at that point in certain aspects where you cannot tell. If you see an aerial shot, there's a rule of thumb that I've heard that if you see an airplane or a helicopter in a movie being filmed from another plane or another helicopter, it's CGI. Because that's really difficult to do. To fly 2 planes in a way where one of them is filming the other one, it's too difficult. So they just film empty aerial shots like that, and they put in the planes later, and nobody notices. They do this in movies that are not special effects heavy movies too, like, I don't know, historical movies or like whatever. If you see a plane that's being shot from another plane, there's a good chance that it's CGI, and it's good enough to do that. But as I said, there's some intangible. If you watch the movie Congo, which is not a great movie, there's a sequence in it where there's a plane that's being shot at by like ground fire, and they gotta divert the shoulder rockets with flares because they're like heat seeking. So somebody fires a shoulder rocket from the ground, and they kind of shoot the flare gun out of the side of the plane, and then the rocket sort of homes in on it and it explodes. And they really shot that sequence for real with that plane and other planes because it was made in, like, I don't know, 1995 or something like that. And so you couldn't really do CGI to that complexity at the time, and it really makes the sequence really, really exciting. And the sequences in Mad Max have an intangible excitement to them because they really, really did it. And I guess, what more can I say about Baby Driver? The cast is really good. Kevin Spacey's really good in it. John Hamm is really good in it. Others, I mean, everybody's pretty good in it. Like John Bernthal, he has a small part. Jamie Foxx, really good in it. And that's about it. I mean, I really enjoyed it. I don't want to spoil more about it, neither in terms of plot nor in terms of, there's one moment where this happens, or there's one moment where that happens. I think that's where you can actually kind of spoil the movie if you start pointing out the many instances of coolness that are in it, rather than just like saying it has a lot of cool stuff in it. Just go watch it. And that's, I think I'm going to end what I'm going to call a segment here. I'm going to put in a little like transition, and I'm going to pick this up after I watch Spider-Man. So maybe tomorrow I'll record it. Hopefully I'll have stuff to say about Spider-Man, because if not, I'm going to have to figure out something else to talk about. Maybe anime. I don't know. But I mean, I have a feeling I'm probably going to have some stuff to say about it. I also, you know what? I have a quick bit of news before I switch. There's rumors going around because we got Comic-Con and D23 coming up. And there's rumors now that there's not going to be a Star Wars trailer at all in either of them. The big talk was like there's not going to be a Star Wars trailer at Comic-Con because Disney now does their own thing at D23, and they can build more publicity for their own brand by saving all of Disney's really good shit for D23. But now they're saying there's not going to be a trailer. There might be behind-the-scenes footage, but no trailer. Now, take that in concert with the fact that the teaser that we already got for The Last Jedi showed very little. It was very sparse, and the details about what's going on and the plot and stuff, very, very sparse. I'm sure if you go and read online, you can find them, but I'm just saying like general audience-wise. And we're getting pretty close. We're in July. This movie's coming out in 5 months. And we still know barely anything about it. That's really good. I really hope that Disney has the balls to sit on this movie as much as they possibly can. I'm sure there's going to be a trailer close to the release of the movie, or even not that close. I mean, it might happen a week after D23. But if they're able to resist the urge to, again, do this like blanket media blitz of publicity, I actually think they will benefit. One, they save lots of money because the conventional wisdom is that you spend almost as much as your production budget on advertising. So if you make a $100 million movie, you usually spend $200 million. $100 million making it, $100 million marketing it. That's crazy. It's crazy when you're dealing with a franchise that everybody already knows. Everybody knows about Star Wars. Everybody knows there's a Star Wars coming out this year, or maybe not everybody, but and I'm not saying they shouldn't advertise at all. Obviously, there's going to be billboards, and there's going to be print ads and web ads, and there's going to be lots of that stuff. But if they can resist the urge to push a lot of new footage and new characters and new details out there, because everybody already knows, you don't need to entice somebody to come watch Star Wars. All you got to do is tell them that there's Star Wars. Hey, everybody, there's a Star Wars. Here's the date of the Star Wars. That's all you need to do. I don't think you even need to tell them what's in it. It's just a Star Wars. Come see our new Star Wars. It's a sequel to the other Star Wars. So, I mean, they are in a unique position where they don't actually have to reveal a lot. They just got to say, here's the sequel. We're going to find out what happens to Rey and Finn and Poe and BB-8. And there's going to be Luke and Leia and whatever, Kylo Ren. That's it. And so if they manage to do that, I'm going to be super impressed. And I'm also going to be super excited because I do kind of miss that experience of going in blind and not knowing what you're going to get. I mentioned Cabin in the Woods earlier in this podcast. And when I went to see that, I didn't know anything about it. Somebody said, don't read anything, go watch it. And I was like, really? That movie about that cabin? And he's like, he said, like, don't let that fool you. It's not what you think it is. And I said, okay, that sounds interesting. And I went, I watched it, and I had one of the best movie-going experiences I've ever had because I didn't know what I was walking into. And even during it, I had no idea where it was going to go. And so every twist and every development was this brilliant experience of like, oh my God, this is so out of left field. And so maybe Star Wars won't be as crazy as that. But, you know, it does have the power, you know, every visual that isn't revealed in a trailer is more impactful in the theater. I think we all recognize that, right? We all know that when they put the Doomsday Monster in the Batman v Superman trailer, that made it less special. If we had all seen that, if we had no idea that there was going to be a Doomsday fight in Batman v Superman, if we thought the Batman-Superman fight was the climax of the movie, then maybe we wouldn't have loved it. But I feel like that end part would have been at least more surprising and more exciting. Like, oh, wow, wait, what? Wait, there's a Doomsday in this? But we all knew. There was nothing surprising about it. And by the way, I feel like DC made a horrible mistake because they also were in a unique position where they didn't really have to reveal too much. We got your Superman, we got your Batman, and I don't even know if they had to say we got your Wonder Woman, but, you know, just say that or whatever. And that's it. Why do you need to show them everything that's going to happen in the movie? People love Batman. People love Superman. People will go see your Batman Superman movie almost regardless of how much of it you show them beforehand. Some movies require convincing. Movies that everybody already love, you know, franchises that are already beloved. And I mean, we're talking beloved franchises. Superman, Batman, Star Wars. There are very few franchises that you can say are as beloved as those three, as that trifecta. Batman, Superman, Star Wars. More than any, I mean, Spider-Man, sure, I guess. But so those movies in particular, I think, are in a unique position of not having to reveal their hand. And so we'll see how that relates to Spider-Man Homecoming, because I did feel like the trailers show too much. Sony was in charge of the marketing of that movie, and that's very apparent. Marvel are getting really, really good at marketing their shit. Sony are not good at marketing their shit. Sony are not good at doing anything except making video game consoles. And I guess people probably even flame me for saying that, but I do have a PS4 and I do like it, so whatever. So yeah, but I do hear that it actually doesn't tell you or show you everything. And so in the next segment, I'm also probably going to be able to discuss how much cooler the stuff was that I didn't know was going to be in this. So stay tuned. And I'm going to do a little, I don't know, sounder. I'm going to find some sound effect to shove here. And when that sound effect is over, it's going to be Sunday.
Life is a great big day. Wherever there's a hay, you'll find a Spider-Man.
And as promised, the sound effect ended, and it is now Sunday. And I, as promised, went to see Spider-Man Homecoming last night. And as predicted, I have some stuff to say about it. Mostly, entirely good things. Mostly good things. We'll see. Let's go down this path and see where it takes us. But before that, I got to do some housekeeping. Because I can't believe I spent like 30 minutes talking about Edgar Wright, knowing that I was going to make this episode a half Edgar Wright, half Marvel episode, and I didn't mention the whole Ant-Man story. I mean, I went off on tangents, and I wasn't even paying attention. So, Edgar Wright was also supposed to make Ant-Man. He was actually one of Marvel's early hires, and he left because of creative differences, and the movie was, you know, wrapped up by someone else, but it still has a little bit of that Edgar Wright-ness in it. It's a nice movie. It's not my favorite Marvel movie, but it's certainly not bad. And unfortunately, like, I wish I could have seen what Edgar Wright would have done with it, although I don't know if he really can function within like a cinematic universe like that. Like, I feel like his movie might have stood out too much as an Edgar Wright movie, but, you know, I could be wrong. Maybe he does have the ability to do that. I mean, other directors, like, I don't know, Christopher Nolan, can do their own thing, but they can also then kind of shift gears and do something like a superhero, like a big studio superhero movie. But yeah, that was the little Ant-Man footnote for the Edgar Wright story. The second thing I want to talk about before I get to Spider-Man is that I went to see Spider-Man in what they call a Dolby Atmos theater. A thing they do now a lot is they have these like premium brand movie theaters. The one most people know is IMAX, right? Bigger screen, more expensive, the seats are better, whatever. A lot of theaters now also have their own premium brands. I think AMC has like a HDX or something. No, it's not HDX. It's called, I can't remember, and I'm not going to look it up now. But these theaters where like they'll give you nicer seats, the screen will be bigger, and sometimes it's one of those like silver-backed screens that are brighter. They'll have really good sound systems. They'll charge a little more. Everybody wins, I guess. And these Dolby Atmos theaters are pretty nice. Like they have like nice big leather recliners, really good surround sound, bass that's so loud that it's almost rumble. It almost functions as a rumble seats, where an explosion will kind of make your seat shake. And yeah, the screen's big and curved and whatever. And another thing they do at the theaters like this, like IMAX too, is they'll provide exclusive content to entice you to see it in that format. And in this case, the thing that we saw before Spider-Man was the first sequence for the upcoming movie Valerian and the City of a Thousand Planets, which is also a movie I've spoken about on this podcast before. I can't remember how extensively. I should have gone and checked before I was saying this. But in just brief introduction, Luc Besson, French director, Valerian and Laureline, famous French comic book series about space cops, whatever. It's never mind. Luc Besson loves this franchise as a child, wants to make a movie out of it, can't get the rights, so he hires the guy who made it to help him design his own sort of movie that's also set in the future and has this crazy future in it. And then Luc Besson and this guy he helps Luc Besson make The Fifth Element, which is a movie I love. And now, years later, Luc Besson finally has a chance to make the OG, the Mac Daddy, Valerian and Laureline. And we're getting a Dane DeHaan's in it, and what's her name? Cara Delevingne, I think is her name. And so, as like one of those like Dolby Atmos promotions, they showed the first 10 minutes of, was it 10 minutes? No, it wasn't 10 minutes. It was a montage. The movie opens with a montage sequence. And so I'm going to describe it very briefly. I wouldn't really call this a spoiler, I think. But feel free to jump ahead a little. I might time code this in the description just in case you don't hear, but I'm not going to describe it, like shot for shot. I'm just going to tell you what it is. And it's a montage with the David Bowie song Space Oddity. And it shows like the future of human space exploration in montage form. Like, here's the International Space Station, and here we're meeting with Chinese, and then we're going to jump 10 years ahead, and we're going to show it a little bit more advanced, and we're going to slowly show, how the things advance, and how, aliens come into the picture. And it's done in just a really sort of clever, cute way. Sort of gave me like a nice, warm feeling. A lot of practical effects. And just sort of a cute idea. Because not everything has to be cynical and dark and gritty. Sometimes something can just be kind of nice. Like, ooh, this was a cool thing that they did. This was an interesting opening to this movie. It's kind of positive and affirming and shit. And so that definitely increased my excitement about Valerian. I'm very apprehensive. I'm really, really looking forward to it. It looks really cool to me. I like quote-unquote outsider approaches to stuff like that. That's why I loved The Fifth Element. It wasn't your standard come up through the Hollywood system movie. It was kind of an outsider type movie. And this is too. It's also based on a foreign franchise. There's a lot of potential for them to do stuff that is less than stuff that we don't see over and over again in all of these movies. So yeah, that's Valerian. And as I said, it's coming out on the 21st. Like next week, there's War for the Planet of the Apes, which I'm not interested in. And then the week after that, there's Dunkirk and Valerian. And I'm going to see Dunkirk on like 70 millimeter IMAX. I might do a podcast about that. I don't know how much I'm going to have to say about it. I still don't really know what Dunkirk's going to be like. I like that. But it might just be one of those like important war movies in terms of like the emotional impact, and it might have some cool visuals, but I don't know how much I'll be able to talk about it. I'm pretty sure I'm going to have a lot to say about Valerian, whether I like it or not. But yeah, we'll see. Busy July. Lots of good stuff. Lots of good stuff coming out in recent weeks and in upcoming weeks. So that's cool. Which brings us to the aforementioned titular character of this episode, Spider-Man, and the movie Spider-Man Homecoming. So let's take a step back. Spider-Man, biggest comic book character ever, I think. I'm pretty sure he's the most popular and like sells the most merch and stuff. And this is the 6th big screen Spider-Man movie. And amazing Spider-Man, all of his iterations were kind of similar. I mean, they were different in tone and stuff, but think of how different all the Batman movies are, where you go from like Burton's Batman in the late 80s, early 90s, which was really of that time period and had that kind of attitude, and compare that to something like the Nolan Batman movies or even the Schumacher Batman movies and the Snyder's Batman v Superman. They're very different in tone and in how Batman functions. And Superman, same way. Donner Superman. And then you got Superman Returns, which is kind of Donner-ish. But then you have Man of Steel, which is a very different vibe. Spider-Man, there was no real attempt to make like a gritty Spider-Man, like a Dark Knight Spider-Man. Some may argue that Spider-Man 3 was an attempt to do that, but I can counter-argue that that movie's silly and not gritty. I mean, its attempts to be gritty come across as silly. There's good stuff in Spider-Man 3. I thought a lot of the Sandman stuff was really good. Never mind. Overall, that movie's terrible. I personally like Spider-Man and Spider-Man 2. I don't like 3. I don't like either Amazing Spider-Man movie. I thought that iteration of it was not good. But Spider-Man Homecoming is a legitimately good Spider-Man movie. It's not like, oh, that's nice, and they kind of got it. Or no, it's really good. For many reasons that I will discuss once I take a sip of my coffee. Okay. Where do we start? Tom Holland is a very good Spider-Man. First of all, he's young. Second of all, he comes across as young. I don't know if he's as young as the character he plays. Probably not. But he's certainly not in his late 20s playing a teenager. And the teenager vibe works the best in this Spider-Man movie. In the other movies, it feels like a movie high school in both iterations. In the Raimi one, because everybody's super old. In the Mark Webb version, because it's this, everybody's a cool hipster kind of guy, including Peter Parker, which I thought was a horrible creative choice. Like, well, what are we going to do with Spider-Man? Let's make him a cool guy. The girls are all going to think he's hot because he's Andrew Garfield, and the guys are all going to be like him. No, sorry. I mean, you could do that, but it's just not going to be the right feel for Spider-Man. He's supposed to be kind of an awkward nerd, and I like the kind of awkward nerd that they made him. Not a geek, not a push your glasses over your nose, constantly reference Star Wars geek. No, he's really smart, but he's sort of an awkward kind of geek or nerd or whatever. And the cast of school characters like Flash Thompson, the non-jock bully now, not just a dumb jock, because they're all a group of like smart science decathletes. His friends and the characters at school who some of them are just there for color, but do it in a really good way, meaning they really give it that John Hughes cast of characters vibe. Like if you look at The Breakfast Club, just as a random example, it's this like cast of high school characters, right? It's supposed to function as like a microcosm of high school. You got your beautiful cool girl, and you got your jock, and you got your stoner, and you got your weird girl, that kind of stuff. And this is a little like that. I mean, they're all nerds on the nerd decathlete team, but you have these different kinds of archetypes, and they're interesting characters. They're not just a trope, a walking trope. Flash Thompson is a little, but the other characters are not. Liz and Michelle and whatever. And the other thing that I think really elevates this movie is Michael Keaton. We just discussed 89's Batman. I think this movie, it's become a cliche to talk about how Marvel movies have weak villains with sort of inexplicable motivations often, and sort of who randomly go crazy, And in this movie, you got Michael Keaton playing a non-crazy, non-evil, believable, and even almost sympathetic villain. We're gonna get to it in a little bit. I'm gonna launch into spoilers in just a little bit and explain a little more about this. But he's just a guy. He feels like he's like a no. You know what? I'll say this in spoilers. I don't want to. The thing that I'm going to reference might be a little too spoilery for your likes if you don't want to know anything about it. But I'll say this: the movie felt more like the villains in it felt more like a group of criminals that you would see in a good crime film, like in a good detective story. Meaning like replace Spider-Man with two cops trying to figure out who's doing all this stuff, and take away like the comic booky elements of it, and you have just like a solid sort of crime story. And I think that's a really good idea. Not, like I said, not every comic book movie has to have an inexplicably evil, inexplicably crazy bad guy. I want in Ant-Man, they kind of excused it by saying that that Cross was he went crazy because of the pimp particles. But then in Iron Man, you had whatever his name was, Obadiah Strange, whatever his last name was. He just went crazy. And sort of and Ultron just sort of went crazy, and so you get the same thing kind of over and over again. Armies of robots and blue lights and aliens and stuff. And this was smaller in scope, in scale. Reminded me more of like a Daredevil than a Captain America. Which I think is good. They're building with this. They set a lot of foundations in this movie, and it was apparent. It was really apparent that they were saying, this is our introduction to Spider-Man. We're not doing a Spider-Man origin story, which was, again, a brilliant idea because we don't need to know Spider-Man's origin. Actually, a few reviews that I saw of this movie said they took that even a little too far and really didn't mention it at all. So that if somebody watches this movie in like 30 years, they might not know what the hell, like where did the Spider-Man guy come from? But they didn't bother with that, but they still wanted to make, an origin story. They still wanted to make a story about how Peter Parker and his like little like self-invented character becomes a fully fledged superhero. And he is a diamond in the rough, in the in the Raimi Spider-Man and also in the Web Amazing Spider-Man, they show him become proficient in like montage form. There is that hack Spider-Man scene where he wakes up in the morning after getting bitten by the spider, and all of a sudden he's super strong and he doesn't need his glasses and he accidentally breaks his sink, and then all of a sudden he's on the wall, that. And then there's a montage of him doing that and also learning how to like swing from his webs, and he fails a few times, and then the next time you see him do it, he's perfect and swinging and doing all this crazy stuff. This movie took the time to show that he was relatively clumsy in the use of his body. Anything that involved, jumping around and web swinging and stuff had like a wild quality to it. If you see, his body's kind of flailing and his moves are kind of jerky, and he's constantly like bumping into stuff. It shows that he's still learning. And I mean, he gets kicked around by people who are certainly no match for him, physically. He's a superhuman, and he's fighting people who are regular people. They have like tech and stuff, but normally you would see Spider-Man like run circles around something like that. But he's not good enough yet. And I thought that was really nice. Like, it made more sense to me. That's a personal gripe that I have a lot with superhero movies. Like, just because you have superhuman powers, that doesn't mean you can instantly know kung fu and be able to like pull off crazy stuff using it. I mean, think about your regular human body, right? The fact that you can run and jump and roll and I don't know what, crawl, doesn't mean that you can proficiently do anything that involves any of those actions, like run and jump between two things without touching them and, narrowly avoiding obstacles as you run. Sure, you could do that, but if you never tried it before, or if you've only tried it a couple of times, you're probably not going to be great at it. You need practice. Which is something also that the Marvel Universe kind of shows. Like Captain America, you see his evolution from like just a regular 40s type soldier to like a modern day anti-terrorism, like a modern approach to hand-to-hand combat, because he's training. He's training and he's becoming better. And also a lot of characters and a lot of story arcs were introduced here in a deliberate attempt to set up stuff that happens later. And I know they do that in a lot of movies, but sometimes in other movies it's a lazy way of doing it. It's just they introduce a character like, oh look, it's that character, so I know there's going to be another movie. In this Amazing Spider-Man 2, I think there's a scene at the end where you see like a basement full of like Spider-Man Rogues Gallery tech, the Vulture suit, the Rhino suit. Almost like, see guys, we're going to make a whole franchise. And here it was more like these characters have a relationship that kind of develops to the midway point by the end of the movie. And then you're like, okay, so their relationship is probably going to evolve more in the next movie. And things that are left open-ended so that you don't even know if they're going to address in another movie, in like a sequel, but they certainly can. So they're creating this world, right? And I think I'm going to move into spoilers now because there's a lot of things I want to say on that topic specifically. So look down below at the time code, and you can maybe skip ahead. I don't know if there's going to be anything else at the end. And so if not, then I'm just going to quickly say that this has been the Neoncast number 14. And that I am at Neon Taster on Twitter. And there's at Neoncast, which is the Twitter account related to the podcast, where I also tweet notices about my Twitch streams, which is twitch.tv/neontaster, the YouTube channel, youtube.com/c/neontaster. For all of these and more things, not as much more things as I had initially intended. But hopefully, down the line, I'll put some more stuff up there. And last but not least, neoncastpod at gmail.com. If you want to write me a thing that's longer than a tweet, and stuff like that. And so I'm going to take like a 5-second break, and then I'm going to say a little bit about spoilery stuff. Okay, so back to the idea of building a world. This movie goes a long way into establishing more of like the Marvel Cinematic Universe as a fleshed out world. The movie starts with a scene in the aftermath of the first Avengers, because the Vulture Toombs, his origin story is that he had a salvaging company that got a government contract to clean up the rubble from the Chitauri invasion in New York that happened in the Avengers. And then he gets shut down by the government by damage control, which is a real it's like there's an actual comic series called Damage Control, and it is about the people who go up and clean up after the Avengers. But it is like a government entity, or it's like a top secret entity. And so this regular cleanup crew gets kicked out. They lose their contract because it's all classified now and taken over by the government. But this guy built a whole operation with this. He got a big government contract. He went out, he bought trucks, he hired people, and now he's like financially ruined. Because all of a sudden, without compensation, the government comes along and they say, you're done. Pack up your shit, go. And you can even see that happening. You can even imagine something like that happening for real. And it also gives, here you have a villain that's created because of other previous events in the Marvel Universe. Now, I think that's happened before, sort of. A little bit like Winter Soldier, a little bit has like an origin like that. And then afterwards, Black Panther enters the Marvel Universe because of events. But, those are events in the same movie. Now we're talking about a movie that happened years ago, and how an event that happened to a person related to that event festered over the years until now he's a villain. And so what happens is, like I said, Toombs and his crew get fired, and then he decides he's actually going to keep some of this alien tech, not hand it over to the government. And then he and his crew spend the next several years developing them into weapons and selling them on the black market to criminals. And I was going to compare Michael Keaton's character to something, and I didn't want to spoil it. He's Walter White. He's basically Walter White. I called him Vulture White. Because he's a guy facing financial ruin who has a family and is going to go into a life of crime in order to support that family and adopt like a scary alter persona for his crime life, while in his family life, he's still a regular husband and dad, which again was also a huge spoiler. The big reveal, again, spoiler alert, that he is Liz's father, by the way, elicited a big audible gasp in the theater I was in when he goes to her house for the dance and the door opens and Michael Keaton's standing there. There was the audience just went, which was great. That's exactly what you want, right? You really want to have that kind of punch, like, aha, see? You didn't know where this was going, and I didn't expect it at all. I thought maybe he would go to her house and they would all be tied up, with like two of the Vulture's like henchmen, and then he would hand him a phone, and then the Vulture would be on the phone, and he would say, "Here, come to this place, or we're gonna keep," whatever, something like that. Or maybe he would walk into the house and there would be a TV, showing them tied up somewhere, like a supervillain type plot. Instead, he's her father, and not only is he her father, he doesn't know that Peter Parker is Spider-Man. He discovers this now in the process of them driving from the house to the dance. He figures it out because of some stuff that his daughter says. And then he says to her, "Okay, sweetie, go in. I'm going to have the dad talk with your prom date." And she leaves, and they have this amazing scene together. And, you know, I think it's impressive. I think it's a note to the credit of this movie that the most intense scene in it is a scene with the protagonist and the antagonist sitting in a car, not wearing their superhero costumes, and just talking. That's pretty cool. You know, in a movie that later has the two of them fighting on top of an invisible plane, trying to get alien tech and crashing it into a beach. The more intense scene is them having a discussion in a car where Michael Keaton says, you know, you saved my daughter's life, and so I'm going to give you one more chance to walk away from this. Which, again, a rare thing to see is the villain saying to the hero, look, you know, I would do anything to protect my family. You know, he was going out to kill Spider-Man, basically. He even said to his henchmen, I'm going to kill him. He's coming too close. The feds are on our tail. We're all going to go to prison. I'm going to kill him. But he can't do it. He says to him, look, you saved my daughter's life, and so here's your chance. Walk away. Stay out of my business, or I'm going to kill you and everybody you love, or whatever. That's a great, great line, I thought. Also delivered brilliantly. I mean, Michael Keaton is just so good. So menacing in a kind of a subdued, quiet way. Like, he's not yelling. He just says it with like a little smile on his face, like, I'm going to kill you. You don't understand. You're a kid. And I'm an adult, and I'm going to fucking kill you if you mess with me. And, of course, Spider-Man can't walk away, right? But in the end, saves his life, the Vulture, and then the Vulture does him a solid in return by not telling other people who he is. A really, really cool ending to this arc, this like conflict arc between the two of them. And so now you don't know what's going to happen with the Vulture. I mean, he can still come back to fight Spider-Man. I mean, he can still leave prison with some vendetta in his head. Maybe he isn't telling the other people who Spider-Man is because he wants him for himself. You don't know, but that's great. You now have the Vulture's in prison, and you do not know if he's an ally or an enemy. And so that can come back in another movie. They can make a Sinister Six movie with him. There's a lot of stuff they can do with this character now because they didn't just kill him. They didn't just put him on a rocket and send him into the sun or blew him up with this. That almost happened. Like, they were teasing, they were kind of faking that was going to happen because his suit was malfunctioning, and Peter was like, you're going to explode. And then it does explode, but he doesn't die. Good stuff. What else? A lot of little Marvel references, blah, blah, blah. It was very funny, I thought. And I did like the quote-unquote MJ character. I know that people didn't like that she was MJ at the end because she's not Mary Jane. I thought that was kind of clever because there was this whole debate about whether or not Zendaya was going to be Mary Jane or not, and whether or not that's okay because she's not white and she's not redheaded and blah, blah, blah. And so a couple of things about it. First of all, I thought Zendaya was great. Great. Interesting, unusual, unorthodox character. Who's not just a pretty girl and is also not the love interest. She's just this other character at the school who's cynical and dry and really funny, but is also teased as a potential future love interest. At the end, really, really subtle move where she just looks at him as he walks away for a second longer than you would if you weren't thinking like, I guess that guy's all right. So yeah, very subtle. They didn't need to do more than that. Obviously Tony Stark and the whole arc of that movie where he's like a disinterested parent. Him and Happy function as like disinterested parents who are not paying attention to this kid who actually needs them in a time of actual need. And yeah, a really good like mentor type story, and as I said, brings Spider-Man to the same mental place as the kind of like Uncle Ben dying origin story, great power, great responsibility type thing, and also the whole idea of Spider-Man trying to balance his personal life and personal problems with being a superhero, which is what Spider-Man's all about, basically. That's basically the thrust of Spider-Man as a character, is that he's an everyman. He's you and me, And but, on top of having you and me type problems, he also has, save the city, save the world problem, which I think makes him relatable. More than almost any other superhero, he's the one that we all feel like that's how my life would be if I suddenly got superpowers. Because none of us are Batman, right? None of us are a billionaire. And none of us are an alien like Superman or an Amazon like Wonder Woman or a mutant like the X-Men or a space radiation enhanced astronaut like the Fantastic Four. Any of that shit. Spider-Man is just a kid, a regular poor student who now has to save the world. And that's us. He's the most us that you're going to get. And I think they really explored that theme well. I'm very excited about the next Spider-Man movie they're going to make. I'm very excited about his appearances in Infinity War. I think that perhaps aside for Tony Stark, I feel like he's probably going to have the best character arc of all of these Marvel characters. And Tony Stark, we didn't even know that was going to happen. He was this cocksure, egocentric, disinterested, hyper-pragmatic playboy. And there's still touches of that, especially in this movie. But so many things have happened to him. He's become a much deeper and much more interesting and introspective character because of all the stuff that he did. I mean, it's most of the Avengers' problems are his fault because he was the one selling the Stark weapons and he was the one who created Ultron, and he was the one who put Scarlet Witch under house arrest after the Sokovia Accord thing, which made Captain America say fuck you. He made a lot of mistakes, and I think that only now, later in this whole big Marvel arc, is he coming to grips with that and maybe even taking responsibility for it. And Spider-Man, mentoring Spider-Man in a way, I think is a good way for him to kind of transition into this next phase of his character, possibly the last one. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if, he learned his lesson in a very final way right before being killed by Thanos. I would not be surprised if that happens. There's even a theory, because they hint that Miles Morales, the other Spider-Man, exists in this universe. Donald Glover, who appears in this movie briefly, is his uncle. And so somebody theorized, hey, maybe what'll happen is that Tony Stark will die in Infinity War, and then Peter Parker will become Iron Man, and then Miles Morales can be Spider-Man. They even showed that the suit at the very end that Tony Stark offers Peter as like his Avengers Spider-Man suit kind of looks like the Miles Morales Spider-Man suit, or a little bit like the Iron Spider. So, I mean, there's a lot of predictions about potential like rotation, because in the comic books that happens a lot. Somebody dies, somebody else takes their mantle. There's a different Thor, there's a different Iron Man, there's a different Captain America. And so who will do it? If Captain America dies, who's going to be the next Captain America? Is it going to be Bucky? Is it going to be Falcon? Because both of them have been Captain America. If Thor goes away, who's going to be Thor? It's not going to be Jane Foster because she's not around anymore. But who knows? And so on top of bringing in other heroes, they can actually make new identities for existing heroes. So Iron Man can live on as somebody else. Doesn't have to be Tony Stark. And so now we have 3 movies in the next year. We have Ragnarok that's coming out in like 4 months. And then we have Black Panther early next year. And then after that we have Infinity War. And yeah, I mean, this was a really great addition to this universe, despite technically being a Sony movie. But, Marvel knows how to do this stuff. And they're getting better. They're getting better. Their hit rate is increasing. Their internal consistency in terms of quality is increasing. Even doing something standard like Doctor Strange, which is a very standard origin story. They managed to inject it with special things and things that made it unique, particularly one aspect that I talk about a lot, which is that at the very end, Doctor Strange doesn't fire a big laser at Dormammu to kill him. He outsmarts him because Doctor Strange is a really smart guy. And so instead of, pulling out some like Deus Ex Machina at the very end and saying like, I learned this spell, the big blue laser of Darbala or whatever. It's like, I'm gonna trick him. I'm gonna trick this eternal space entity with my wits, and it works, and that's great. And Spider-Man. This Spider-Man had a lot of those Spidey themes, those like overcoming adversity and finding new strength within yourself, and putting aside your pleasures of the moment and pleasures of the flesh because there's something more important than you that you need to do. And so yeah, kind of like what I said after I saw Wonder Woman, I also feel like this movie is kind of inspirational and could serve as a good role model for young kids, like a 16-year-old kid. Like, I feel like the Spider-Man is actually a really positive influence. And it's an aspect of this world that is rarely discussed these days, but, that was originally a big point of comic books. Kids looked up to these characters. And I know kids are more savvy these days and go on Snapchat and sext each other at 13, but putting positive role models on screen is not a bad thing. I think Captain America is a really positive role model. Tony Stark, not so much. And also, like I said, I thought Wonder Woman did a great job of that, especially for women. And I think Spider-Man will do it, especially for like teenagers, which is great. Because why not? Why wouldn't your hero be someone that the audience wants to be like, want to mimic, and not just in terms of, having abs and swinging from buildings, but also in terms of the kind of ideals and morals that they represent. And I think that on that note, I'm going to end. Post-credit scenes, Ferris Bueller reference with Captain America, loved it. Huge laugh in the audience with that because I think we all know on some level that staying to the end of the credits to watch some 30-second zinger that you're probably going to see on YouTube like in a couple of weeks is kind of dumb, and yet we all still do it now. It's become a part of seeing a Marvel movie. It happens in other movies too, but I think Marvel really canonized the post-credit scenes to the point where when you go see a Marvel movie, you're going to be sitting there until the lights come back on, which is neat. I think it's sort of neat. And yeah, like I said, on that note, sorry, I'm going to end this episode 14 of the Neoncast. And as always, I don't know when I'm going to do another one. I hope that I can get to do these when there's something for me to talk about. So, like I said, in 2 weeks, when I have 2 more movies to talk about. And then maybe I might talk about Rick and Morty. It's coming back July 30th. I've just now gotten into Rick and Morty. I finally had the chance to sit down and watch all of the episodes. And I love it. I'm not going to talk about it a lot now because, like I said, the spoiler people are already not listening anymore. But yeah, possibly if I do another episode in 2 weeks or so, before the premiere of season 3, I can talk a little about Rick and Morty, me discovering it and what I like about it and why. So stay tuned. And as I said, at Neon Taster, at Neoncast, neoncastpod at gmail.com, twitch.tv/neontaster, and youtube.com/c/neontaster. That's where you can find all of my shit. So thanks for listening, if you have been listening, and if not, then why am I talking to you?